Hey, this is Steve Bloom, and you are listening to the GeekCast Radio Network.
GeekCastRadio.com presents the GeekCast Radio Top 100 Animated Films Countdown.
Hello, Gotham. Joker's back in town.
Hello and welcome to GeekCast Radio, episode 57, the wrap-up episode to the Top 100 Animated Film Countdown. I'm your host, Steve Megatron Phillips, and joining me in this final episode of the countdown is...
OptimusSolo.
Movie Revoltan.
And TV's Mr. Neil.
So, before we jump into our main conversation for the day, the ghost of TFG1 Blanchard will be piping in with a special prepared clip right after this.
Pathetic fools! There's no escape!
Take it away, he says. Well, I have to say thank you to everyone who gave feedback for the Top 100. Most of it's been positive. There are some gripes that are legitimate, and I agree that, I personally could have done a little bit better on my list, but I did spend 3 days straight going over my personal Top 100 that I submitted to OptimusSolo for the final list inclusion. Now, as far as my anime bias or lack thereof towards anime, I'm not someone who watches that. And this, to me, the top 100 animated films, when I see animated, I think regular, traditional animation, not anime. I'm not an anime fan. I recognize and respect the genre for what it has done, but it's not something that I watch a lot of. As you heard in the records, there was one movie, Ninja Scroll. I had seen that. So, I have watched some anime, I just don't watch a lot of it, and I'm not going to, regardless of what anyone thinks, watch anime to make up my list. I got a lot of the classics in there was some stuff that I forgot. I want to let everyone know about my top 5. My top 5 changed over the course of the 3 days that I took to put my list together. My top 5 were... The Lion King at number 5, Aladdin at number 4, Transformers the Movie at number 3, Batman Beyond Return of the Joker at number 2, and Wreck-It Ralph at number 1. Now, I do know Kevin's math process in going into doing these top 100s. If you rank a film number 1, it gets 100 points, or whatever it is, and number 2 is 99, and so on and so forth, etc., etc. That's the general math he uses. So... over 3 days, my top 5, at one point I had Lion King at number 1 and Wreck-It Ralph at number 5. At one point I had Batman Beyond Return of the Joker at number 1. They all mixed and matched for the longest time until I finally settled on the order that I sent with Kevin for the final list. Now, Transformers the Movie at number 3. I don't care what anybody says about, it's just Hasbro making room for new toys. Take that away from it. Look at the story. Look at the animation. Transformers the Movie, if that was the only thing that Generation 1 had actually done, it would have been the best thing ever. Look at those characters. I guarantee you at least one character in that film that was, shown on screen majority of the time, someone would be able to relate to at some point or another. My personal opinion was Transformers the Movie is the third best movie of all time because of everything it did. Even if you take away from the movie that, it's Optimus Prime dying, if you take that emotion away, it's still a damn good movie. It has a good story that flows from beginning to end. It has great animation overall. There are some points in it that it's, a little sloppy at best, but overall it's really, really, really cool. And that's the way that I went about making my list. I just went, I wrote down 100 films. I then put numbers to all of them, and I jumbled them all around. As I said before, there was some stuff that I did forget, but overall, I'm very happy with the list that I turned in, and I'm very happy with how the countdown has turned out. The list I'm very pleased with it. I think it's great, and the feedback. Thank you to everybody who sent in emails. Thank you to the people that sent in voicemails, MP3s. Thank you to OptimusSolo and Movie Revolt Dan for putting this together. OptimusSolo did all the math and all the rankings and all the compiling, and Dan brought in all the new contributors. Thank you to everyone who contributed. It was very, very awesome. I'm sure the guys will talk about what we're doing next in the later portion of the show, but thank you so much, because I'm not actually here in the Top 100 wrap-up. I'm elsewhere doing life stuff. Yay! So this has been TFG and Mike. Steve, who's next?
Screw you guys. I'm going home.
Well, thank you for that tirade, Mike. Now, I think we'll get into the more serious part of the episode. Take it away, Kevin.
Alright, so we have revealed all of our top 100 animated films countdown. You've hopefully listened all the way through. We've had 5 extensive podcasts that discuss all of the ins and outs as we revealed, I guess you can call it live, to the other hosts each number as we went through. We've had a little bit of time now to reflect upon that ourselves, so now we're coming back for a wrap-up episode so we can discuss all the good things, all the bad things, and everything in between as we go through. So we got a bunch of stuff to talk about, a lot of reflection going on, and we're going to just get right into it. I know a lot of you are probably waiting for a discussion of the films that just missed the list, or what we're calling our honorable mentions, or I guess it shouldn't really be honorable mentions because we could talk about any film that got even one single vote. But that discussion will be taking place, so just hang tight. We'll get to that. We'll leave you wait a little bit before we go there. We're going to start off with just a brief explanation of, at least for the 4 of us, how we came up with our lists, what our methods were, what our logic was, etc. So I'm going to start with Dan, just to kind of give all the people that have been listening throughout this thing, because I know a lot of people have been wondering, they've only heard a small portion of the entire pool that helped submit lists. I mean, there was over 20 lists, over 20 individuals that submitted lists, basically, and we all probably had a different method, and hopefully give the listeners a little bit of insight as to how some of us came up with our list. So Dan, how did you come up with your list? What was important to you? What logic did you use in ranking your films?
Okay, I mentioned this, I think, on an episode, but my basic concept when putting my list together was, like, if I were to give someone a movie, like give people an example of animation, like what movies would I give them that would show them like the complete capabilities of animation to its highest level? Like movies that would show that animation could be just as a powerful medium as any type of filmmaking. So those were so I started there. So that's when I constructed my top 5. And if just looking at my top 5, which were number 1 being Grave of the Fireflies, number 2 being Waltz with Brashear, 3 being Lion King, 4 Spirited Away, and 5 Toy Story. I feel like those are all important in that end, and also have a significant impact on animation. With Toy Story, obviously, what it did with CGI animation. Lion King, to me, like I said, it's the crowning achievement of Disney in many ways. And also, I also thought, I tried to remove personal biases as much as possible. For example, Aladdin is probably my favorite Disney movie, but I don't believe it's the best Disney movie, so I did not rank it. I ranked it in the top 20. I did not rank it in the top 10. I also thought, if I were to put this list on a blog post or a written article, would this be a respectable list? So I tried to make sure that I had a well-versed variety within my list, making sure that I'm hitting all areas as much as I possibly can. I obviously didn't rank anything I've never saw, but I made sure I'm not just listing Pixar after Pixar after Pixar or Disney after Disney after Disney, that I'm making sure I'm hitting all the different areas. So, and then like usually I did it in chunks, or I started with ranking the studios, like each studio from top to bottom, and then started after I ranked each studio, I then put it together that way as well, just to get an idea of how I wanted to do it. I mean, the hardest part, I think, the top 50 was the easy part. It's harder when you get to the end and like you're trying to just, talk about films that you aren't that passionate about. So it's like, is this an 80s film or a 90s film? It's hard to determine, like my final 10 or, mismatch here and there. So that's like my mindset. I kind of went about it in different ways. And so, and my basic principle was, if I was to put this out as an article by myself, would it be respectable? And hopefully it would be. I guess, I'm sure some people would have some issues with it.
Neil, what about you? What was your method? I know you were one of the first ones that tackled this project and got the list turned in. What was the method behind your madness?
Well, it was a little bit mad. I'm a little more chaotic than most people. I just wrote down as many movies as I could think of and just kind of shuffled them all together. I did, even though I handed it in pretty quickly, I did spend at least an hour or two just kind of shuffling them around to like a more proper order, because obviously I couldn't just put like all Disney and Pixar films at the top. I had to kind of balance it out a bit, but and unfortunately, like I said during the other shows, I had a couple brain farts where I think I omitted like a really good movie here and there, but oh well. Yeah, I started out with like as many like of my personal favorites, and I went back through each of the studios and said, okay, well, there's this movie and there's that movie. Like, I haven't, like, there are a lot of Pixar movies that I've seen like once or twice, and I didn't really consider them the first time I went through my list, and then I had to go back and fill them in. Like, I think like Monsters Inc. like is not one of my favorite Pixar movies, but I can understand why people would like it. So I would have to rank that somewhere in my list, and I didn't have a real system going into it, but I had certain movies that I thought were significant and significant enough, but I tried not to let one thing outweigh everything else. Like if something was a really significant movie but not really something I thought was fun to watch, I would try to get it in there, but I would try to knock it down like maybe 20, 30 points. Like one of the ones we mentioned was Snow White, where it's a movie that everyone should watch, but it's not a movie that I would consider one of my favorites. And it's not a movie that I think a lot of kids today would watch, so they should watch it, but it's not like a movie I would recommend right away. And that's I don't know, I can't really describe too much how I did my list, because it was such a chaotic thing that I had put together, but there was a slight method to my madness, I should say, I guess.
Well, yeah, and I think sometimes it is hard to kind of get into how people are, formulating their opinions on quality, and I think it's good that you guys both mentioned the balance between studios, etc. That's kind of leads into how I did it. I'm very systematic with these types of things, so I try to break them down into chunks because it's easier to deal with. So, like Dan, I would take all of Pixar's library, and I basically ranked them from top to bottom. That way I could just compare all those films in one chunk. And then I took all of the DreamWorks, all the Disney, the anime films, the superhero films, as much as I could break it down into those different chunks, films that were based off of TV entities. And once I had those, then basically across my screen, I would be sitting with my whatever it was, let's say 10 categories, and then I would basically just look at the number one movie on each of those lists and decide which of those was going to be number one, then knock that off, then look at, okay, what's remaining on the top of each list, what goes next, and kind of try to break it down like that, and until I had what I felt like groupings like Dan was talking about in like my 10s or my 20s, my 30s. Which I'd break it down so I'd have what 10 films are going to be somewhere in my 90s, what 10 films are going to be somewhere in my 80s, and then once I had those sections, then you can actually look within those 10 and then try to pinpoint within those 10, the 1 through 10 order. So that's kind of my system of how I did things. Not saying that there wasn't. I've done a few lists like this before. So I think there's two different ways that personal bias can play into it. Number one, you could just blindly rank all of your favorite films, which is one thing. There's also, I guess there could be some strategy if you know that some films are somewhat under the radar or not as talked about. Maybe you in an attempt to get them in the list, could bump them up a little bit. I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but that could be something, or films that you think are, sorry Dan, overrated. I can't think of a better term. Maybe you bump those down a little bit. So there's some strategic moving that you could do. I tried to avoid that as much as possible. My top 5 is somewhat reflective, I guess, of my era of being a child, and I wasn't trying to do that intentionally, but I do have like Aladdin and Lion King in there, and I also, I know a lot of people hate on these films, but I think An American Tail and the original Land Before Time sometimes don't get enough credit for what they were, so I rank those pretty high as well. Steve, how did you come up with your list?
Well, when I came up with my list, for me it's kind of complicated. I tried to, one, not list sequels if I could help it, of any saga. Didn't matter what it was. I tried not to list any kind of sequels, unless it was like the Dark Knight Returns Part 2 or something, or like Toy Story 3, something that was relevant of a top 100 list. Because as we stated in the top 100, most of the time sequels don't live up to the original. So that was one of my things. A lot of it I based off of either the genre, whether it had some kind of a wide release, and when I say that, I mean that it was on TV, or it was something you could easily pick up at the TV rental stores, or VHS rental stores, whatever. I would also base it off of certain animation styles, because as I've stated before, I can't get into the claymation stuff very much, or certain kind of styles of film that just aren't traditional. And I also tried to base it off of somewhat the voice acting and the music, the audio track mostly. I will admit I did have a superhero bias, but I tried to space it out. So I wasn't listing all of them in my top 10 saying, yeah, they're all great, blah, 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 because they're not. Even some of the ones I argued about in the top 100, the official list that was all put together, a few of them I didn't rank, and a few of them I did that never showed up. So obviously they weren't as popular, and that's fine. But that was really my only kind of guide, and I tried to portray as many of the good films as I could find, and tried to represent them. I didn't try to inflate them. At least I didn't try to intentionally to give them a better placement. I just put them on what's the most memorable to me, as far as rewatchability, or how well I can stand sitting through the movies, even the first time. So I mean, that's a lot of how I kind of geared my list. I would get bashed for it if I actually put some of my list actually out there, which I may yet do, just to kind of see what people think. But it's, again, I tried to list things and kind of space them out by studios, or not list sequels. That was pretty much my main pet peeve.
Well, and we'll get into this a little bit more when we talk about the general feedback of the countdown, but that's one reason, we talk about revealing our own personal list, or people have asked to see, some of the individual lists, and I think that's one reason why we have included as many groups and people as we did, because anytime you narrow it down and look at an individual person's list, it's going to be target practice, and the way you escape bias as much as possible is by expanding who you're including in this, and that's one reason why we have 20 plus individuals, because if you just have a narrow group, you're going to really be able to see the bias. I'm not saying that there was anything wrong with the way we did some of these, for those people that listen to our top 10 genre films countdowns. Those were really fun, and I think we did a good job, but that's something that you can see some bias, because we were only including 4, 5, 6 people at the most.
Well, that and those films were also kind of already biased because they were based on each genre.
Right. So that's something, like, when you include less lists, you're going to be able to see more bias. So that was the point, was trying to include as many as we could. And honestly, to give a little insight, I guess, there was one point where I was almost ready to pull the plug on this whole project, because I didn't think we were going to have enough people to make a list that was going to be something that could stand up and be worthy of people listening to. It was going to be completely too one-sided if we were only including a limited number of people. Dan really stepped up and got a lot of people involved, and I think that's when a list like this can work, is when you have a lot more people, because then if one person has this bias and one person has that bias, it kind of all evens out a little bit. Yes, there might be some bias that still is seen or whatever, but it eliminates some of the big, huge biases that would have happened. And I can tell you, but that's something that including the most lists will eliminate a lot of that bias. And I can tell you kind of some inside, for say, there was a lot of individual bias. Like, there were some people that had, like Steve said, a lot of superhero films, etc. There were some people that had obviously a whole lot of the 90s and 2000s stuff ranked high. There were some people that had more of the 80s, and early 90s stuff ranked high. There were some people that had a very dominant anime list. Some people that had, so there were so many different people. I've obviously been the only one that can see every single person's list. So yeah, if we were to only include a few, just being someone who's seen all the different lists that were submitted, you would be able to see a lot of bias. But since we included so many, I can say it did eliminate a lot of that. So, and like I said, we can get more into that with the feedback portion of this. But Dan, Neil, Steve, any thoughts on that before we move into the next section?
No, I think I'm good.
Yeah, we can go ahead and move on over to the next section.
All right. Well, before we get into this discussion of films that didn't make the list, we want to talk a little bit more about the actual list and what films were included. We're going to start off going through, we've each made our own individual mini list about our big list, about stuff that we think we either had too high or too low. So obviously too high means that it was ranked too high on the list is too near the number one spot. Too low would be down by the 99, 100 rankings. So we're just going to go around the table and talk about 5 films that we think were ranked too high, 5 films that we think were ranked too low, and hopefully this can give some insight to the people that were listening that weren't obviously all in agreement of where everything placed on our list. Let's start with the ones that we think we had ranked too high. And I'm going to start with you, Dan, since I started with you in the last section. So 5 films, and you can talk about them, defend them, or discuss each one if you want to, but 5 films that you think we ranked too high amongst our top 100.
Okay, I'll start with the one I think was the biggest standout of one that was ranked too high, and that was Brave, which we ranked at 41. I think Brave is a fine movie. It's like I've heard a lot of people say, it's Pixar visuals with a Disney story, but I just don't think it's 41 worthy. Maybe 80s or so. It's just, I don't know. I don't think it's one of the lesser Pixar. It's on their bottom end. So, and that came before a lot of classic Disney, and I would not put it nearly that high. So I would drop that down a great deal. The other one, what we talked about within our top 20 episode, which was Wreck-It Ralph. Don't want to go on this much further because we talked about this a lot last episode, but pretty much it's, again, a movie I like, movie you could see in the top 50. I have issues with it being in the top 15, top 20. That's just too high for me. And another one, surprisingly, is that of Howl's Moving Castle. A movie that I am not the hugest fan of. I think it belongs in the top 100, but it was at number 50 on our list. I would put it, 80-ish, near the bottom 20. I think there are better anime films out there that are, far superior to it. And it came after Totoro, I believe, as well, and I think that's a much better movie. So, and that was my fourth. Sorry. And for the fourth one, and bringing it back to Disney, was that of Hercules. That one ranked at 54, and that to me is much too high. Again, another 90s Disney movie. That to me, it was a decent story, but not great. The music wasn't all that fantastic, and I don't think it's all that memorable compared to a lot of other movies. So I would move that down a great deal as well. And lastly is that of Tangled. Some people have made a good point that Tangled may actually even look better in hindsight years down the line, because since it's been released, Disney has been on the upswing with Wreck-It Ralph and now Frozen, and I could see that. But Tangled by itself is a good movie, but top 25 of all time, I don't know. I don't think it's that high. I would push it down to 40. I think you make a better argument for Frozen that just recently came out than you would for Tangled. So, a movie I like, but 24 is a little bit too high for me.
All good choices, and I'm glad that I was smart and came up with more than 5, just in case some of mine were already talked about. Steve, what are 5 films that you think were ranked too high?
I would also agree about Brave. I'm not going to sit there and repeat, but I'm pretty much the same agreement on that. And then I have 3 Disney classics that I just... again, I think it's something about the times, and it's just... I don't see them being... I'm hitting 4 other films anyway that are in the 10 to 20 range. I'm not making any bashes against anime because, again, I don't know squat about it. So these are all films that I know. And I'm just going to rattle them off other than the last one. Dumbo, Sleeping Beauty, and Snow White. Just something about them. It's again something about the times, and it's just while the story may hold up, those are ones that could use a redo in the animation and audio department. So that's why I don't see them as being in the top 20. While they are memorable, I don't see them being top 20 worthy. Toy Story 2, I'd put it just a hair above 20, maybe like 20 itself or 21, just because there were a lot of other good films that were ranked higher up that, while Toy Story 2 was good, it paled in comparison to the first and the third, which obviously both hit right at the very beginning of the list, but again, that's my 5, so...
All right, getting some diversity here and some agreement with Brave. Neil, you think Brave was too high as well? What were your 5?
Yeah, I think Brave was too high. That was definitely one of mine. I'm not going to, again, I like what Steve said, I'm not going to really repeat anything. So I'm also going to call out 2 Disney classics, which would be Snow White and Cinderella. And I think I had already said why I thought these were a little too high before, because the main protagonist is not really all that interesting, and they're almost the same story, and well, I thought later Disney princess movies were a little better. Tangled, I thought was a little too high. A lot of the more recent Disney films, I think they definitely belong, but I'm not so sure that they are like top 20 or top 30 worthy of that. I don't think. And one that this might be a little controversial because it's not really in the top. I think it like hit like somewhere in the middle of the list, but Transformers the movie, I think I would dock maybe 30 points, just because yeah. So it's like it's still in the middle, and there were a lot of other movies, particularly anime, where I said like I think I'd said something like this movie, I'm not fond of it, or I don't think it's that noteworthy. But on the other hand, I thought that it actually landed somewhere appropriate. Whereas Transformers, I like the movie, but I don't know if I put it at 48. There are a lot of really good movies here, and I think a lot of them belong above Transformers. So yeah, that one. Yeah. Let's see. Did I mention all? Yeah, Tangled, Brave, Snow White, Cinderella. Yeah, that's 5 for me.
All right. I knew I was going to be going last on some of these, so I kind of had some backups just in case we had already talked about everything. I agree with a lot of what the panel said here. I agree that as far as the modern films, I believe Brave was way too high. And what got me with that one is overall looking at the group that it was in, the episode that it was in, especially the 10 films that we talked about. Right with Brave, it just didn't seem like it. It seemed like we were kind of getting into somewhere. If you take like 45 through 35, that 10, like Brave really stands out. That it just doesn't seem to belong there. I agree. The same thing with Tangled and Wreck-It Ralph. I believe all of those are just a little bit maybe of their like what some people suggested. That's what people have seen recently. That's what's on their mind. So it was easier for them to think about it. But I think over time those won't be ranked as high. Like Dan said, maybe Tangled ends up being ranked that high in retrospect later on, but I think some of these fall if some more years go by, and it won't be that just like instant. That's on the tip of our tongue, so we talk about it. So yeah, I agree with all of those. Another one that somebody brought up that I agree with is Toy Story 2. I have no problem with Toy Story 1 and 3 being in our top 20, or in this case our top 10. I don't think Toy Story 2 belongs in that top 20 with them. So I would bump it. I wouldn't bump it too far, but like Steve said, somewhere in the 20s, maybe 25 range, 30 range, somewhere in there. I think there's all three of them being as high as they were, I think showed maybe a little bit of bias as far as some hardcore Toy Story fans. I'm not saying anything against the franchise. It's great. 1 and 3 deserve it. But I don't necessarily think all three deserve to be as high as they were. A couple that we didn't talk about that I just personally think are a little bit too high. One would be A Bug's Life. We went a long time without seeing a Pixar film. Bug's Life came in, I think it was the first one on the countdown, and it came in at number 46. I think we should have seen a Pixar film prior to that. I would have put A Bug's Life somewhere on the other side of 50. Rather than in the top 50. So I would have changed A Bug's Life. I also would definitely change Sword in the Stone. Sword in the Stone we had 49th. Out of all the Disney films, I don't see Sword in the Stone being top 50. I had it ranked 89th instead of 49th, so I had it 40 spots lower. So I definitely would. I don't see how Sword in the Stone can be ranked above some of the Disney films that it got ranked above. So I would definitely move that one. Anybody else thoughts in general of anything that anybody else brought up, or arguments for or against people's picks as to what they would move?
Yeah, I think we're pretty much in agreement in most areas. Like I would disagree with something like Snow White, but I like I said, it's not really an argument of its quality, because I agree that there are issues there with that character, but I think you also have to kind of consider, the time period in which it came out, the fact that you are, where movies were at that point, that, trying to tell a complex story was something that was easier said than done, but I wouldn't disagree that, moving in a few spaces would be a big deal. But yeah, it seems like for most of the ones we mentioned, we seem to be all in agreement, which is interesting.
Yeah, we'll see if that agreement continues if we flip the scenario around now. Instead of talking about stuff we ranked too high, stuff that we did not rank high enough. We'll kind of go in reverse order. I'll try to talk about some here, and then we'll move down the line. But these are 5 films that we think we had ranked too low. I will start with Watership Down. I think we kind of talked about this during the record. It came in at 75. I had this in my top 20, so I thought Watership Down definitely should have been ranked a little bit higher than the number 75. I just think it's unique. It's something that stands out to me when I'm looking at stuff overall. We talked about trying to balance things out between, not just having a bunch of Disney films, not just having a bunch of Pixar films, etc. If you're looking for that, a unique film that is different than everything else, that has some super high quality, to me, that's Watership Down. So I would rank that much higher. I would also rank, I know there's some people that aren't a fan of this style, but I would rank Chicken Run higher. We ranked it at 61. I again had it in my top 20. To me, it's not anything to do with animation. It's not anything to do with voices. And this one, it's not anything. This one, for me, is straight writing. The story, the dialogue, and how clever it was put together, and how much it kind of homage different things in the history of movies, television, etc. So I think that should be higher. A more recent one, we talked about some recent ones that we had too high with Wreck-It Ralph, Tangled, and Brave. I think Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs actually kind of got ranked a little bit lower than I would have liked to see it. It was at 88. I think it's a little bit better than 88. I wouldn't put it in the top 50 or anything. I would put it closer to 50, 60, maybe even the low 70 range. I think 88 is not quite justice to that film. So that's 3. Rescuers Down Under, I would probably, we talked a lot about that one compared to the original one. We ranked Rescuers Down Under 72. We ranked the original 47. I would probably flip those. I think Rescuers Down Under is better than 72, and I think Rescuers is not quite deserving of 47. So I might flip-flop those two. And last one, I would probably rank South Park higher. I know we had it 43. Me personally, I had it 13. I think South Park was more deserving to be, maybe top 30, top 25 material, somewhere in there. So those are 5 that I think we didn't quite get enough credit to. Dan, or who? Let's see, that's Neil. Which ones do you think we had too low?
Wow, you and I had a lot of the same ones. Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. I didn't think it was like a fantastic film, but I thought it was a cute film, and I thought it definitely deserved to be a lot higher than what it got. Let's see. I'll say both Chicken Run and Wallace and Gromit. I guess just because I'm a sucker for Aardman and I actually like their animation style, so and I think they're funny. That studio, or actually the guy who runs that studio, Nick Park. I think the cartoons he makes are really funny, so I think they deserve to be a lot higher. Rescuers Down Under, I always thought that was a better film than the original. I liked both films, but I would have definitely flip-flopped them. And The Secret of Nim, just because
I had that also as one of the ones I was deciding about.
Yeah, The Secret of Nim is just it just blew me away back in, God, what was it, like 83, 84 when that came out? That something like that came out, it wasn't Disney, and it was actually a pretty solid story. And it wasn't like a musical either, so there were no singing animals. There was a song in the movie, but it wasn't like no one was actually singing it.
We had that one ranked at 40. How high do you think you would have put it?
I would have moved it up maybe another 10, 15 spaces.
Yeah. I agree.
Those are my 5.
All right, so a lot of agreement here so far. Let's see if we can change it up here. Steve, which ones do we have too low?
I also agree for Cloudy with the Chance of Meatballs. I really enjoyed that movie. I think it was really well done. Definitely one of the underrated on the list. I would also say, and this is part of my superhero bias coming out now, so just let me get off my soapbox. Mask of the Phantasm, I think that should at least be top 20, and it could easily be replaced in there with some of the ones I called out of the top 20. Just because that is the, in my opinion, it beats World's Finest and some of the other ones with a shovel. It is the definitive Batman backstory, and it also has a relevant plot into the regular timeline of the story. And it kind of takes place in the animated series, but it really doesn't. it stands alone on its own for the most part. So again, that's my soapbox, and that's I have a personal bias with it, but that's also I think the animation and the audio was really well done. I have Dark Knight Returns Part 2 in there. I think it should have at least made the top 50. I don't think it should have. I mean, because it is very recent, and it is the definitive Batman versus Superman story. So I see it being that, but I don't see it getting any higher than 50 or any closer to 1 than 50. And again, that's followed by my Return of the Joker. I'd put it somewhere close to there, at least maybe the 60s or something. Another film I like that's not superhero is I think Titan AE kind of gets a little underrated to some degree. I will agree it's not the best film on this list, but it's also not bad either. I think it could have made it another maybe 10 slots or something. But again, that's just personal thought there.
All right. Interesting to hear a couple different ones there as well. Definitely some voices to the superhero fans amongst us or that are listening might agree with you on some of those. Dan, what do you think? Any that we already talked about? Any different ones?
Well, I agree with you, Kevin, on South Park and Mothership Down. Those were two that I would put much higher than they were. South Park and Mothership Down, easily top 30, top 20. The number one on my list, though, is Persepolis, which came on our list at 87. I had it as 11, and I do think that is very much a top 20 worthy film. I just think it didn't get ranked that high because a lot of people haven't had the opportunity to see it. Obviously, my number...
I think we should be able to predict one of yours.
Yes. My number 2, which was Waltz with Bashir, which turned up at number 100. No, I don't think it'd be ranked 2 on our list, but I do think it deserves to be, top 20, top 30 consideration. Again, I think it's one of those that just a lot of people haven't had the opportunity to see, and it is an oddity of a movie, and I could see that not really resonating with a lot of people. But on a story standpoint and an emotion standpoint and just an artistic level, I think it, if you can appreciate it for what it does there. In addition, it's kind of funny because Steve mentioned that he would put Dumbo lower. I would actually put it higher. I had that in my top 10, and I don't know, maybe I have a soft spot for that for some reason, but I just find that movie is just so tightly woven, and I appreciate it. It does everything it needs to do in such a small package and so effectively, and there are a lot of great small moments that I like in that movie. So we had it at 28. I wouldn't put it much higher, but I would put it on the other end of the other end of the 20s. And to finish out, it is Fantastic Mr. Fox. We had it at 54. Again, I would put that other side of 40, other side of 30. I just love the stop motion animation, the design of all the characters, the voice acting, the comedy, the script in that is really tight as well. So I would have all those put a little higher. And I think as of right now, I probably have 40 or 50 films that I'd put in my top 20, just looking at this stuff. But yeah.
That's all right. That's the other struggle of coming up with these lists that I think some people don't understand. It's easy to say how high you would rank some, or how that these are all top 20 or top 30 worthy until you actually go to make your list and you run out of spots.
Exactly.
And then you start struggling on what do I kick out, what do I bump, what do I, how do I fit all these in there. A little bit more discussion of the current list before we get into honorable mention discussion. Because before we can talk about any films that we would put in our list, we would obviously have to remove some films from our list to make room for them. So that leads us right into our discussion of 5 films that we would take out of the top 100. So, we talked about those that we thought we had ranked too high, but that wasn't the argument to necessarily boot those films out of the list. We just thought that they were too high. This is a little more serious. These are films that we're saying have no place being in our top 100. Let's see how much repetitiveness we can have with this one, or if we're in agreement or not here. Dan, Dan, start off with one film that you would kick out. We'll kind of just do one at a time, make it a little different. One at a time around the room until we've mentioned all the films we want to talk about. So we're going to switch things up a little bit. Instead of having everybody list theirs one at a time, we're going to each take a film and then go around. So until we've talked about all the films that we want to kick out of the top 100. So we're going to start with Dan. Just give us one film that you would take out of our list entirely.
Ooh, just one. That's hard. Actually, I had a few here. The one.
We'll get to all of them, but we're going to go around.
Okay. The one that I'll start with, like the highest ranked, and then move down. The highest ranked, which was 93, which was World's Finest. Again, not something I dislike, but for the fact that it originally aired on television and it was just put together, I think that opens up the floodgates for other considerations of other things. So I have an issue with it there, and I just think there are better DC animated movies that we could replace it, like New Frontier or other Batman movies. So I would take World's Finest out and replace it with some other stuff.
All right, Neil, one film you'd take out of the list.
Let's see. Probably Emperor's New Groove. Just because that's one of those Disney films that I thought I was like, oh, okay. I mean, it's okay, but I think everyone, if anyone likes this film, it's probably for one single scene, and it's like the waterfall scene, and otherwise it's kind of a forgettable film.
I agree, actually. Steve, one film you take off the list.
Sorry, had it on mute. I will piggyback on Neil's thought here.
So you would also take Emperor's New Groove off? Okay. I also had Emperor's New Groove on my list as one that I would kick off, but I will give a different one here. I'd probably take off TMNT. I just don't see how it stacks up against the rest of them. I don't see it as a top 100 film. If I'm going to put a Turtles film in there, it's going to be Turtles Forever, if I was going to put a Turtles film in there. So I would take TMNT out of the top 100. Dan, another one?
Rise of the Guardians, that came in at number 92. I thought that was a pretty bad movie, and like I mentioned, it's one that I think will be forgotten in just a few years. So, and then interesting enough, comes right after World's Finest. So,
I would also take Rise of the Guardians off the list. Neil, another one?
A Bug's Life, and I mean it's a Pixar film, and it's not a bad film, but if there was one I'd squeeze out of the Pixar lineup, that would be that one.
All right, fair enough. Steve, any left on your list that you would take out?
Shrek 2.
Shrek 2 sequel casualty.
Yep.
I can see that. I know a lot of people like this film, but I will never, ever, ever, ever understand why I would take Madagascar and kick it as far from the top 100 as I possibly could. I don't like anything about that film. I think it's a train wreck. Dan, back to you.
I would take out Meet the Robinsons. It's just one that I just find it's very forgettable, and similar to Rise of the Guardians, it's just it was up at number 80, and I just don't think it deserves it.
All right, Neil, anything left that you would take off?
I think all of mine have been said. Shrek 2. I mean, that's already been said. Yeah, I don't really have anything new to add.
All right, Steve, anything left on yours?
I also agree on the TMNT because I'd rather see Turtles Forever, but I think that's pretty much it for me.
All right, I had a lot that have already been said. I actually had Brave as a possibility of taking off the list, but I went with Rise of the Guardians instead. Let's see, I said Madagascar, I said TMNT. We talked about Emperor's New Groove. My only other one was a three-way tie. I don't care which one you take off of the list. I just don't think all of these are worthy, and that was between Hercules, Tarzan, and Hunchback of Notre Dame. I just don't think that every Disney film that came out in that era should be on our list, so I think at least one or two of those need to be removed. Dan, we'll end with you here. What's left that you would take off the list?
I'll just run down these real quick. I had Prince of Egypt, Titan AE, Justice League Crisis on Two Earths, and Anastasia. I just thought Anastasia was a really dry and generic movie, so Again, not movies I think are necessarily bad, but since I'm going to be adding movies, these are the ones that these are the ones that I felt like should be taken off.
All right, well, that means that we have some room on our list for new entries if we're taking all of the ones that we just talked about off of the list, and nobody raised any huge complaints about removing any of those. So if we're removing those, we have a whole pool of movies to look at to see what we can put in there. Before we give our actual selections on which films we would narrow it down to and actually put in our top 100 if we each had control of the list, we're going to just talk about the honorable mentions in general. Talk about, remember, if you remember back to the first episode, I had mentioned that over 350 films got votes, and we could only talk about 100 of them during the countdown. So that left over 250 films that receive votes, but not enough votes to actually make the list. So we're just going to have a general discussion about the honorable mentions, anything that stands out to people, films that they voted on, or films that they maybe forgot about that they want to talk about. This is a good time in the record. If you have a pen and paper handy, you might want to get it out. You might want to open up a Word document or a database that to enter some names. Go open up your Facebook or not Facebook, your Netflix account to add some movies to your queue. Whatever it is, you might want to make a list because we might be talking about some films that you've either forgotten about or you've never seen that are worth watching. So just looking at the list, everybody in front of them has a list of all of the other films that got votes on, starting with the ones that were closest to making the list, going all the way down to films that barely received more than a couple points, which means they were on one list and they weren't ranked very high. So the lowest voting total was 2 points. That means one person ranked it basically like 99th on their list. And the highest we had was 289, which means that it missed the actual countdown by 7 points. I'm just going to real quickly run down the ones that were the closest because a lot of people have been asking what just missed the list. The films that just missed the list were the animated version of Lord of the Rings, All-Star Superman, DuckTales the movie, the Clone Wars movie, Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, G.I. Joe the movie, The Brave Little Toaster, Castle in the Sky, Monsters University, and The Great Mouse Detective. Those were the 10 closest to making the list. Don't limit it to that, though, just in general. Dan, your thoughts on the honorable mentions, any films that you want to bring up, any films that you think are worth people's time to watch, to look out, or just general reactions?
Okay, well, I'll make sure I don't mention the ones that I feel like I'll be adding. So just in general, what I would say, I'm surprised, I didn't even think of this, I did, but going through the top 100, but the fact that Winnie the Pooh didn't make the top 100 at all, and considering there was a really good Winnie the Pooh movie in 2011 and the many adventures of Winnie the Pooh as well. I think those, for me, a huge part of my childhood was Winnie the Pooh. So I'm surprised that wasn't much higher. And also part of that is Brave Little Toaster. I watched that movie like every Saturday for some reason. Not a great movie, but it's just like seeing that, I'm just like, wow, yeah, I'm surprised that didn't make it. And some other ones that caught my eye. Ones that I think I personally need to catch up on, or like stuff like Metropolis, which is lower on the list. Ponya, some other, and I know some people mentioned like some of the other computer animation films like Megamind and Puss in Boots. Those didn't make honorable mentions, but they didn't come close to the top 100. But yeah, it's crazy looking at this list in the amount of movies that there are out there, ones that I didn't consider or forgot about. Seeing a lot of the Disney sequels getting mentioned, and it just shows you there's so much out there, and it's hard to like narrow it down to even 100 movies. And of the top 10 that are closest, the one that sticks out to me as like the best one would be Castle in the Sky, and I would probably put that on our list and take off like Howl's Moving Castle, because I think Castle in the Sky is a much better movie.
I wanted to just bring up some films that I think maybe a lot of people haven't seen. With my work that I do for Behind the Voice Actors, I've had a lot of chance to watch things that I would have never watched before in gathering pictures and sound clips and stuff of the different characters, etc. And it's kind of given me some exposure to, like I said, a lot of stuff I haven't seen before. So I just want to mention some that I think maybe are unknown or relatively unknown that people should probably check out that I think are pretty good. I think Quantum Quest is worth checking out for sci-fi fans. That's a really interesting science fiction animated film, going along with some actual real life scientific study type things, but then obviously completely fictionalized, etc. But it's an interesting film. I think Legend of Secret Pass is an interesting one. Alpha and Omega might not be the best movie, but compared to some of the other Disney and DreamWorks and stuff we included, it's right in there with those. I think I kind of have a soft spot for the Hoodwink / Happily Never After. I'm not saying they're great films, but I think they're cleverly done. Some other ones, I think the movie 9 is decent. I think Mars Needs Moms is decent. Wizards, kind of a more, I guess, cult classic animated film, is somewhat deserving. Like I said, TMNT Turtles Forever had about 202 points. I think that was more deserving than the other Turtles movie that made it. And the last one I'd mention would be Heavy Metal. I think that's another one. I'm avoiding the ones that I would select to put in like Dan did, but I think those are some interesting ones. It's interesting to see too, like you said, like none of the Winnie Pooh films made it. A lot of the films based on cartoons didn't quite make it, like we talked about DuckTales, G.I. Joe, the film, Care Bears, the movie. I'm not saying that any of them deserve it. I'm just saying that they all did get votes. I wanted to bring that up. And a lot of other anime did receive votes. So it wasn't that we were completely biased against anime, just not all of them got quite enough to get in there. You mentioned Castle in the Sky. There's a lot of other ones looking over this list that I'm sure you guys can speak to better than I can. Neil, what catches your eye looking over the honorable mention list?
Well, okay. There are a lot here that I thought should have been on the list, but can I take a stab at one that maybe I'm kind of glad didn't make the top 100?
Absolutely.
Okay, Lord of the Rings, and it's only because one of my friends once described this movie as a bunch of cartoon people who are constantly being attacked by a bunch of live action people. It is a good chunk of that film is live action. It's just like high contrast film painted to look like a cartoon. So it's kind of on that edge of, is this really a cartoon? Is this more like Roger Rabbit? So that I'm kind of glad that didn't make the list. All-Star Superman wasn't a fantastic film. It won't blow you away, but I thought it was a decent Superman story. Probably would have swapped it with World's Finest. Clone Wars, I don't know which Clone Wars that is. It's a possibility.
The one that was marketed as the actual film.
Okay, yeah, that one. No, I wouldn't. That one I wouldn't have put on. Okay, the movie that was mentioned already, Brave Little Toaster. That was such a cute film, and I was kind of disappointed it didn't make it. Let's see. I see Puss in Boots on here, but again, I don't know if this is like the more recent one or if it's the anime one. It's probably mostly the more recent one, and the anime one was. I was probably the only one who voted for that one, so it doesn't really matter. Let's see. I think. Oh, The Great Mouse Detective. Of all the Disney films in the '80s, I think that's of the three that came out. I think that's the one I liked the most. And I'm glad it got ranked as high as it did. I just wish it would have made the list.
What about speaking of some of the anime stuff that you see listed here on honorable mentions? Anything that you think was worth mentioning or should be in the top 100, or if people aren't huge fans of anime or haven't been exposed to it, some of the things that maybe they should watch?
I'm looking over the honorable mentions. I have a bunch listed here that aren't really close to having made the list, but I'd say I didn't really give this a good looking over yet, but the first one that always comes to mind is Raujin Z, which again was like I was the only one who voted for this, but this is kind of like a battle for me, where it's just like I get tired of seeing I saw like a top 100 or a top 10 list of anime on YouTube recently, and it was like it was like a bunch of Miyazaki films, Ghost in the Shell and Akira, and I even left a snide comment on it. It was like, how predictable. And Raujin Z is like one of those anime films where it's not like, again, it won't blow you away, but I think it's a more fun film. It's 80 minutes. It's not like full of animu crap like everyone like kind of associates with the anime, like hyperactive girls and stuff like that. It's just like a straightforward action / comedy film that I think a lot of people should see, and you may not like it, but I think you'll find that it's more palatable than most anime films. Other than that, no, I can't really think of too many off the top of my head.
Dan, any that you're seeing over, and then I'll come back to you, Neil. But Dan, any that you're seeing anime-wise that you think deserve a mention or that people should check out that we didn't quite have on our list?
Yeah. I guess Tokyo Godfathers. I know there was some question regarding that, just regarding if there was an American version or not. I don't think there is, so I think that's probably why that didn't get more votes. I haven't seen it, but I know a lot of people have high regard for the Cowboy Bebop movie. I saw a lot of people mention that in the post, and I'm gonna butcher this name, but Natasha of the Valley of the Wind. And this isn't an anime movie; it's a French film, but The Illusionist that came out, I think, a year or two ago, which is a really good movie. It's a traditional animation. I think it's French, but I believe there is an American version. But I think that's one that people may want to check out. It's just a great story, and it's one that was really overlooked in the last few years. So,
Neil, other thoughts? I didn't mean to completely cut you off, though. Other reactions as you're looking over this list of honorable mentions?
Well, I think I may have misunderstood. Did we only want to talk about the stuff that's close to 100 or the whole honorable? Oh, okay. Well then, yeah, I was kind of holding back then. Other animes that I had listed was Go 13, which is kind of a gory anime film, but it's also, again, more palatable if you're into like it's kind of like James Bond with a chip on his shoulder. It's if you're not like into what you would normally think of as anime, this is probably a little bit more palatable. Also, Beautiful Dreamer, which is probably not something a lot of you guys would want to see, but I think it's a better Oshi film than the one that made the list. Just because it's funnier and it's still filled with a lot of esoteric stuff, but it's actually, I think, a bit more enjoyable than some of the other anime picks we had. Going back to regular Western animation, Snoopy Come Home, which is, well, the Peanuts films in general, I always had a really fondness of them, but this one in particular was just it was very melancholy, and it's like way different than any other Peanuts cartoon you've ever seen. The music is different, the tone is different. It's very melancholy, almost a punch to the gut half the time. I think Wizards got mentioned. Wizards, a Ralph Bakshi film. And I'm gonna throw in Fritz the Cat too, just because, a lot of the movies on the list are kind of like very polished. They're very top tier AAA movies, and I have an affinity for kind of the I guess sort of grindhouse quality films. I kind of like the roughness of some films. Where it's not like super smooth and the animation isn't just sparkling clean. I like a roughness if it's.
And I think there's something to say that a top 100 list maybe should have a Bakshi film represented somewhere.
Yeah, and it is, and even if people don't find Fritz the Cat, palatable, it's a noteworthy film. I think it was, at the time it came out, it was the highest grossing independent animated movie ever made. I think it still is. I'm not sure about that though. Maybe some of the Rankin Bass films, like Return of the King, I actually like a little bit more than their Hobbit movie, and I don't think a lot of people have even seen it. It's not as rough as the Bakshi films, but it definitely has a roughness. Like I'd say if you're into like really old 80s cartoons, like G.I. Joe before it became a series, like that first 5-part series where it's kind of got that rough Japanese animation style. Return of the King has something similar to that, but it's more stylized. Brave Little Toaster was mentioned. I'm just going to throw this one in here, Pogo for President. It's another movie that I don't think a lot of people have seen, and it's a stop-motion film, and it's a little rough, but I think it was one of my favorites as a kid. I don't think it belongs anywhere near the top 10, but I would put it around like 90 just because it's something worth watching, and I think it is very funny. And it's got a lot of noteworthy actors. It's got like Vincent Price and, oh god, what's his name? Guy who just passed away, played Papa Smurf in the recent Smurfs movie. Jonathan Winters, he was in that, and, yeah. Bunch of other like really noteworthy cartoon actors were in that, and I think that's all I really had. Yeah, those are all of mine.
Before we get Steve's thoughts here, give him another second to look over the list. A couple things I wanted to point out. First of all, we kind of discussed a little bit of the sequels and how a lot of them weren't getting voted on in the top 100, and a lot of them didn't appear in the top 100. They did, however, a lot of sequels did receive votes. Just kind of running down the list, some of the sequels that received votes: Kung Fu Panda 2, Shrek Forever After. We have, let's see what else here: Shrek the Third, Ghost in the Shell 2, Land Before Time 2, Cars 2. Some of the other ones that we have listed here. Cinderella 2, even some of the Disney sequels got votes. Cinderella 3, I think you can blame Mike for a majority of these. He's not here to defend himself, so it's okay. Fox and the Hound 2, The Little Mermaid 2, Madagascar 3, the first one shouldn't even be on there. Lady and the Tramp 2, Lion King 2, Madagascar 2, Street Fighter 2, the animated movie. Interesting. So yeah, there is a bunch of sequels, Happy Feet 2, Hoodwink 2, that did get votes. Just luckily for most of us, a lot of them didn't make it all the way into the top 100. Also, just for curiosity's sake, some people might be wondering about the worst of the worst that did receive votes. If we're running down some of the ones that were at the bottom of the list here, that got less than 10 points, we're talking about Hellboy, Sword of Storms, Megazone Crusher Jove, Happy Feet 2, Hoodwink 2, Beowulf, Final Fantasy Spirits Within, the Rainbow Bright movie, 8 Crazy Nights, 10 Commandments, the animated film, Thor, Tales of Asgard, and Naruto, the movie. Those were at the bottom of the list. Steve, your thoughts of the honorable mentions in general?
There's several movies that I think could have made it. I actually had a hard time narrowing it down to 5. But I would argue that Atlantis, I would say that I liked that film. I think that it was fairly good. I wouldn't put it in my top 50 by any means, or even top 60 or 70, but I think that it's still better than some other movies that happen to show up in the top 100 for Disney. I would have, as mentioned earlier, swapped TMNT for Turtles Forever. Only because Turtles Forever, I think, was a more cohesive story and a lot more interesting to watch. Also, I have Monsters University, being that I just saw the movie, and I wasn't able to actually put it in my list before because, well, I hadn't seen it. And I really enjoyed the film, and for being a prequel, first time Disney doing that one, as far as like Pixar anyway, I think they did really well with it. It's still not better than the original, but I'd still argue that it's worthy enough. Certainly more so than like Cars or Cars 2. So then it gets down a little bit more difficult. These are my kind of half and half of One of them's another bias, another one's not. I kind of had Astro Boy / Megamind. There's aspects of both that I think make it worthy, but then at the same time that don't. I would probably argue more so Astro Boy because there's more of a story and evolution to the characters and everything else in there that I think makes it more interesting than Megamind. But I would kind of put that in there. My superhero bias is coming out for one film. Justice League Flashpoint Paradox. Because it's, again, more serious and this one, the animation's a little bit more dark compared to a lot of the other DCAU stuff that's been displayed, even more so than the Dark Knight Returns. But it's focused in on one character and kind of giving them a little bit of humility in a sense, and then having them have to strive and work towards getting back to where they were. And then you get to see an ultimate moment at the end with something that happens with current timeline Batman and what would have happened had certain events not taken place. So it's kind of a nice film. But yeah, that would be my top 5.
All right, well, he has started it off as far as which ones we would put in now that we've cleared some room, so we'll go around and talk about other films that people would put in their top 100 if they were in control. Neil, which ones would you put in that we haven't talked about here? Which ones would you say are top 100 worthy that if you had to?
I'm gonna go right back to the stuff I already mentioned because I don't think I understood. Probably Brave Little Toaster, but it would be buried in the 90s. I think people should watch this film, and I love the film, but I'm trying to hold back hyperbole, so I don't want to put it up too high. It's a really cute film, really touching, but it's also kind of a product of its time. So yeah, that I would put in there. Let's see. Again, just maybe for personal reasons. Again, go back to Raugenzy, probably like at 99, just to have it there. Just like here's a movie that you probably haven't seen. And after you're done watching the other 99 movies on this list, you should watch this one too. Yeah, I'm not sure what else I would actually just squeeze into the top 10. Anything that really has to be in there. Probably The Great Mouse Detective. Might just be my bias for the film, just because I saw it in the theater and I really liked it, and haven't seen it recently. I don't know if it would still hold up, but I thought it was a really cute film. It's basically Sherlock Holmes as a mouse. Winnie the Pooh. Yeah, I would put that definitely in the top 10. Probably like right in the middle, like 50, somewhere between 40 and 50, I'd put it. Let's see, one more. I would say, let's go with heavy metal. I love heavy metal. Someone else already mentioned it, I think, but heavy metal is another one of these movies where it's not perfect, but it's kind of in the kind of grindhouse genre of not polished but worth watching. So I would put that like somewhere in the 90s.
I think you make a good point about that kind of style too, or something just not being that crystal clean, buffed up thing that's safe for your kids and all this other stuff. Like there is something to say for that. And I have a couple that I would mention as well. Let me get out of the way a couple that you guys have already mentioned. First, though, Great Mouse Detective. I'm 100% in agreement. For a list that had a whole bunch of Disney, for that to be one of the Disney films that was left out of the top 100 has me scratching my head. I would put that way ahead of Sword and Stone. I'd put that ahead of Hunchback, Tarzan, Hercules, Emperor's New Groove. I'd put it ahead of a lot of the Disney films we talked about. So I think Great Mouse Detective definitely deserves a spot. You kind of in passing mentioned Fritz the Cat. I think just for what it was, that deserves a spot somewhere. It's kind of an iconic film for a lot of different reasons. I would actually put Fire and Ice in the top 100. You're talking about that kind of rough, not polished type film. I think Fire and Ice is pretty classic. And I had not seen that before a couple years ago, but I think that's worthy. For those fans of Watership Down, I think one that kind of goes side by side with that would be Plague Dogs. I think Plague Dogs is not necessarily the happiest movie in the world, but that's a film that definitely can make an impact or have an emotional response to it. So I have high regards for that. So yeah, like Fire and Ice and Plague Dogs and Fritz the Cat, some of those more, I guess, fringe films, I guess if you want to say it that way. I would try to find a spot somewhere in the top 100 for them. And then my last one, I was kind of torn between two. I know a lot of people don't say good things about some of these films, but I think Tale of Despero, that and or Brave Little Toaster, one of those maybe makes it in there. I thought Tale of Despero was a good film. And Battle for Terra, a lot of people probably haven't even heard of that or haven't seen it, but I thought that was a decent film too, so I would maybe try to find some room for some of these more under the radar science fiction or that type of film. So those are some of the ones that I would try to squeeze in there. Great Mouse Detective, Fire and Ice, Plague Dogs, Fritz the Cat, and either Battle for Terra or Tale of Despero. Dan, you're the only one left here. Which films are you putting in the top 100?
Well, I'm in agreement with Heavy Metal and Fritz the Cat. I think both of those are these like cultural icons and really hammer home is like subculture and a very like huge like time capsules of a certain era. And I think, I know Fritz the Cat is currently streaming on Netflix along with its sequel. So if you haven't seen it, it's an easy access to it. Some other ones that are on my list, for me, it's the Triplets of Belleville. When we talked about WALL-E, we talked about there's not any dialogue for the first 45 minutes. Well, in Triplets of Belleville, there's a total of 5 lines of dialogue. It's it's told mostly through its score, through its characters. It's a really wonderful movie that I would advise checking out. And if you're not into foreign films, it's one to see because there are no subtitles, because there's no real dialogue. Another one, I love claymation, and one of my favorites is Marion Max. It's an Australian film. It's about this girl from Australia that becomes a pen pal with this middle-aged, down on his luck man from the Bronx. And it's just really quirky and has some dark humor to it. And I think that too is streaming on Netflix. And I love the animation. It's again like one of those French films. It's very messy looking, and I appreciate it for that. Another one that I don't know if this would count because I don't know if I couldn't find an English version of it, but I wanted to bring it up, and that's Fantastic Planet. I've never taken acid, but I have seen Fantastic Planet, and I'm thinking they're about the same thing. Fantastic Planet is one of the oddest films I've ever watched, but I don't know, something about it being so odd that it's appealing to me. I don't think it's an amazing movie, but I think for a top 100, to give it some more charm, I would throw it on there. And like with Brave Little Toaster, like mentioned before, also already mentioned Castle in the Sky, and another one, which is a Cat in Paris, that just came out last year in the U.S. I think 2 years ago in France, and it's a traditionally animated movie, I believe, and I just love the score to it, and the animation is really fluid. And again, I think that is too streaming on Netflix. It's a small little movie that I think a lot of people haven't seen or even heard of. That I appreciate. It's a little gem, I like to say. But yeah, those are my choices for movies that could make the list.
All right, and for those of you that are curious of what other films that maybe we didn't mention that also got votes, we will have this available for you guys to peruse, so you can see that maybe some of your favorites weren't completely ignored. They were voted for or did appear somewhere on the list. We just don't have time to talk about all 250 films that didn't make it. getting back to the actual list that we revealed, I'm going to spend a little bit of time kind of breaking it down, looking at it, dissecting it a little bit more before we get to the feedback. Specifically going into a discussion of how the different companies did, how sequels fared, and then breaking it down a little bit as far as decades and years and how that all broke down. So first off, getting into companies, it should be no surprise with what company had the highest number of selections in our top 100. That would be Disney, who came in with 37 different films that made the list. Following that, with a late push, would be Pixar, which had 11 films find their way into the top 100. We did have 10 anime films. I know that's not a specific company, but I just wanted to give a general number of how many anime films we included. 10 of those, 9 DreamWorks films, 7 films from the DC universe, and then it goes down from there. We had 5 that would be considered, I guess, Blue Sky and or Fox, 5 Don Bluth films, 3 Paramount, which could include Comedy Central, MTV, and Hanna-Barbera, and it goes down from there. So looking at some of those companies specifically, any surprises as far as how many films Disney, Pixar, DreamWorks had, or specific within each one? Maybe we get your idea of what you think should be ranked highest amongst those companies. So we'll kind of go around the panel. What do you think is should be the top-ranked Disney film, the top-ranked Pixar film, or the top-ranked DreamWorks? You don't have to do all of them. Just pick one if you want to, or the top-ranked DC film, etc. Dan, what do you think as far as some of those companies go? What should be the highest ranking amongst some of those companies?
Well, for Disney, I had Lion King as number 1. It's, I think, it may be more of a bias since that's part of my childhood, but I feel like that's the best pure Disney movie. I have no issue with that, with Disney leading the pack. I think that's pretty much expected. For Pixar is so hard. It feels kind of like a cop-out to say Toy Story is the best one, because I don't think if you go on every single aspect of each movie that Toy Story is the best, but considering its impact and the fact that it helped launch Pixar, it's probably there. But if you're just going on film quality, it's tough. Maybe Toy Story 3 or WALL-E or Up. Those are the 3 that to me are the trifecta of Pixar. DreamWorks is easy for me. I think How to Train Your Dragon is the best DreamWorks movie by far, with Shrek a second. And what's interesting just looking at all these companies is I would never guess we had more anime movies than DreamWorks films. It didn't feel like that, but looking at the numbers, that does surprise me.
Neil, any reaction to how the companies broke down? Anything that surprised you, or which films do you like the most out from some of those companies?
I don't remember if anything really surprised me. Disney movie that should have been ranked highest. I should have written it down. I didn't. Probably. I think the thing is, I think the movies, how they landed, as far as each studio, whatever ranked the highest, was mostly appropriate. The Lion King, can't really argue with that. Toy Story 3, can't really argue with that either for Pixar. DreamWorks, obviously either How to Train Your Dragon or Shrek. In fact, I'm probably going to give the edge to Shrek just because, I don't know, it's always my go-to DreamWorks film. It's if you're going to watch any of them, you should watch this one first. So.
Yeah, I think I agree with you on those couple too. I think Pixar, nobody's going to make the argument against Toy Story or Toy Story 3, and if they are, it's like Dan said, it's going to be Up or WALL-E. I think everybody kind of agrees that it's Shrek or How to Train Your Dragon for DreamWorks. Disney, I think there's a lot more debate. Some people would probably go classic Disney. I myself think that the highest ranking Disney film should be from either the late 80s or early 90s with that. With the foursome of Beauty and the Beast, Little Mermaid, Aladdin, and Lion King, and usually people are going to lean towards Lion King. So I don't think there are surprises with how our countdown had the tops of the top company going down. I wasn't sure if we'd have more, like you said, more anime films, more Pixar films, or more DreamWorks films, and they're all fairly close, but I was somewhat surprised to see how that broke down. I didn't mean to interrupt you, Neil. Other thoughts on the companies overall?
Not really, no.
Steve, what do you think about how we ranked amongst each company? Did we get it right for the most part?
I think for the most part we did. I again can't really argue with Pixar. I mean, it's Toy Story or Toy Story 3. That's pretty much the go-to there. DreamWorks, I'd have to argue this, or not really argue, say the same thing as Neil. It's the How Do You Train Your Dragon or Shrek. Even though I really don't care for this series of Shrek, the first film is undeniably good. So again, that's good there. Disney, I'd have to say my go-to is Lion King, which that's pretty common with a lot of people. It's, I think, the last hand-drawn animation kind of Disney film that actually was good. And then my as far as like DC, the only one I would put highest is which again, all of these are the highest for the most part, which would be Batman: Mask of the Phantasm.
All right. We talked about going into this list that it might be something to look for. How will sequels fare? How will they stack up against the originals, and how many will get in the countdown? Unless I missed one, going over the list here, only 6 sequels made it into the top 100. Is anybody surprised at that? And more so, outside of the 2 Toy Story sequels, which were number 2 and number 11, the other 4 sequels that made it, ranked 97, 90, 76, and 72. So they didn't rank very high. And that was Rescuers Down Under, Shrek 2, An American Tail 2, and Despicable Me 2. Any surprise, Dan, that we only had 6 sequels? Yeah, I'm not surprised with the Rescuers Down Under, since most people probably agree with us. Some people won't, but a lot of people agree that that's possibly even better than the original. An American Tail 2, I think, is different enough and stands on its own enough with Five Goes West to include. I can see what you're saying with Shrek 2 and Despicable Me 2, and the possibility of us only having 4 sequels. Neil, what do you think on the whole sequel argument?
Yeah, I was a little surprised that we had as few as we did. But I'm kind of glad at the same time, just because, like he just said, that most of the time sequels, they're more of a cash grab, and I feel that most of them just get made without any they don't really have a story to tell per se. It's like, one of the things I like about Toy Story 3 is that they didn't make it until they finally had a story that was worth telling. It wasn't just like another day in the life of Woody, because that's kind of how sequels feel to me. It's like they shift from being like a single story with a single conflict to being like an episodic thing, like just an episode of a TV show, and that's why I will probably never watch any of the direct to home Disney films that were made. Like who wants this? I don't understand the point of Cinderella 3. It's like the thing is, you already had a happily ever after ending, and these characters weren't very interesting to begin with. What possible story is there to tell that's worth telling with Cinderella? I don't get it. So yeah, I'm happy that only 6 made it.
And Steve, I'm assuming that you're happy too, since you kind of, in your creation of your list, you were trying to avoid sequels for the most part. So, is 6 too many, or is that just the right amount?
I don't really have a problem with it. I think that's fine. I'm glad that more of them didn't show up. I would think I'd be more upset if more than 6 showed up in the list, because it's eliminating spaces that could be better utilized by films that aren't getting represented anyhow. So that to me, it's more of a reason to not vote for them, because it frees up that extra space so you can actually have more diversity in there, rather than saying, oh, well, I like this series, so I'm going to vote the first one, the second one, the third one, the fourth one in there. Whereas if they're truly good in the sense of Toy Story and Toy Story 3, those were the only two like that. I think that was the only instance I listed two films, like one where there was a sequel to it and the original. I don't even think I listed any other sequels in my list at all, other than that, maybe the Dark Knight Part 2, because that's technically like almost one film. But that's the same reason I didn't list Toy Story 2. It was just a weaker film, so it's again, there's no point in having them if it's just going to weaken the overall list.
Right. I agree. Maybe one of the biggest surprises as we revealed our list, and something that we were all kind of looking forward to seeing as we started the list, was which decades would be best represented and which years, etc. And I think most people will agree that, at least on the panel, that we were most surprised as to how that ended up breaking down. I don't know if we expected different, or if we just maybe were blind to the possibility of this happening, but if we're breaking it down by decade, obviously we had a lot of decades represented. We had one film from the 30s, we had 4 films from the 40s, 5 films from the 50s, down to 3 films from the 60s. I guess that shouldn't be a super surprise. Back up to 5 films from the 70s, 13 from the 80s, then up to 25 for the 90s, 30 for the first decade of the 2000s, and then 14 so far in what has been almost half a decade here, not even close, I guess, only 3 years from the 2010s, 14 already. So a very top-heavy list as far as the last 3 decades. Dan, surprises there as to how that decade list broke down?
I mean, yeah, obviously the biggest surprise there is that the 2000s, the first decade of 2000, dominates so much with 30 movies. I guess there's been a huge influx of animation in the last 15 years or so, which could explain it. It's also what's fresh in people's minds. I mean, that's probably a big factor. So I expected there to, for there to be a lot of current movies or recent movies, but that many to me is a little bit surprising. And I thought we'd get a little bit more from the 90s, and actually, and there's more 80s movies than I anticipated. I thought we'd get, fewer in that decade, but a few, that 80s bias is still kicking strong. So, yeah, that's pretty much all I have for just looking at the decades.
Any surprises there? Is that kind of how you thought it would break down, Steve?
I wouldn't say I was surprised at all. I'm pretty sure that I was thinking it was going to turn out how it did, to some degree.
Yeah, Neil, your thoughts on the decades? That's kind of how you thought it would play out?
I don't think I really had a presupposition as to how it would go out, but I guess I'm a little surprised, but that's because I've always kind of thought of like the 40s, 50s, and 60s as being kind of the golden era, and like I'm seeing like I think the 90s pretty much eclipsed the first 4 decades all by itself. It's just such a so. But then again, maybe not, because we all grew up in the 80s and 90s and 2000s, so, and there's certainly been a lot more animation studios in more recent years. Like back in the 60s, it was pretty much only Disney. So yeah, we have not only DreamWorks, but like Sony has its own animation division now. We're getting international films in here now, and so yeah. Yeah, in retrospect, I'm not too surprised. But again, I just wasn't thinking about it when I was compiling the list.
Right. And I think one thing too is, back in those early decades, that was still when they were trying to decide if that was even, making these movies was even worth it, would it succeed or not. Whereas now it's just almost automatic cash cows for any type of successful animated film or franchise. I went a little bit further and broke it down into which years had the most. Most years, if you think about it, when you're breaking down your yearly movie list, like Dan and I like to do, it's rare for one animated film to crack your top 10. Maybe on occasion you'll have 2. Most of these years, as far as top 100 goes, you only have 1 or 2 films represented in each year, with some years having 0. And then there's the occasional 3 in there. But there were a few years that definitely stood out. that had way more films being released in them that made our top 100 than any of the other years. And those years that I'm talking about would be 1988 had 5 films make our top 100, 96 had 5 films, 99 had 5 films, and then more recently 2007, 2009, 2010, and 2012. Looking at those years, Dan, does anyone stand out as just a banner year for animated films in general, or which of those is kind of like has the best class?
I would say 2010. I mean, Toy Story 3, Tangled, Despicable Me, How to Train Your Dragon, and Batman Under the Red Hood. I mean, that's a pretty strong year. Toy Story 3 leading the way. Despicable Me, I think, is a pretty good movie too. I think How to Train Your Dragon is the best. DreamWorks movie with, you can go back and forth with Shrek, like we mentioned. So you have 2 movies there that are potentially 2 of the best movies of their respective studios. So I think that's a pretty impressive year.
I think too what that year does is it represents a whole lot of things. You have, like you said, one of the top Pixar films ever, Toy Story 3, one of the best DreamWorks films, and How to Train Your Dragon. You have what people are calling as possibly the beginning of a new era in Disney with Tangled. Despicable Me might, in a way, represent all the many different studios that are now emerging that are able to compete or be on par with some of those major ones. And then Batman Under the Red Hood, I guess, can represent the comic movie genre as well. So I think that's a good year. If you're an anime fan, I guess you would look at maybe possibly 1988 with Akira and Grave of the Fireflies and Anima Totoro, along with Oliver and Company and Land Before Time, I guess aren't anything to just like completely disregard. The other one that stood out for me was 99 with South Park, Iron Giant, Toy Story 2. I wouldn't necessarily throw Tarzan in there, and Princess Mononoke, but just having Iron Giant and Toy Story 2 and South Park make that one a little bit notable. Neil, any of those that stood out to you as just a really great year for animation?
I'd say, 1999. 1999, just because Toy Story 2, Iron Giant, South Park all in the same year. That was pretty good. I'm sorry, I'm kind of scrambling here because my audio dropped here for while you asked the question, so I wasn't sure what the question was at first. But let's see. 2010 was another good one. Toy Story 3, Despicable Me. That was a good year. Those are the 2 that really stand out to me.
Steve, how about you? Any of the ones that we didn't mention?
As far as
just a year that had a lot of good films coming out, as far as those best classes that we had listed there at the bottom.
I don't really have an opinion.
Okay. And most recently, I think a lot of people, this kind of shows some of the bias that maybe recent films, if you just take that most recent year, 2012 with Wreck-It Ralph, Monsters, Brave, Batman, Dark Knight, Paranorman, Rise of the Guardians, maybe a reason why some of those made the list when we don't think that maybe they should have or maybe they shouldn't have been ranked as high. But interesting that we had a couple of these years, that was 1, 2, 3, 4, that was about 7 years where 5 or more films made it, whereas everything else is basically 1, 2, or 3 for the most part. It's interesting to see how the decades broke down, and I guess if we let the decade of the 2010s continue the rest of the, what is basically six more years here, that I guess it could eclipse the first decade of the 2000s, and it's already halfway there. So it'd be interesting to see what this list looks like, if we were to do it 5, 10, 15 years from now. I guess that leads to another question that a couple people brought up in the feedback, which is, what more recent films do you think might resonate more as time goes by? Is it a consensus that we would be looking at something like a Frozen? Does anything else jump into your head, Dan?
I think Frozen. I think also Dark Knight Returns Part 2, possibly. I think that would fare even better because I think more people would have an opportunity to see it. What else? We've talked about this already, but Tangled, possibly, if we see that being more of a linchpin to this new Disney, Renaissance, and maybe Though we had it ranked really high, like I had some issues with Wreck-It Ralph, but maybe if that even holds the test of time even further, that may be up there again. But those are some. I mean, I can't really think of more. Maybe How to Train Your Dragon again, not to beat a dead horse, but those are just the ones that jump in my head.
Well, kind of going along that same argument, though, maybe as time goes by, do we see the number of films a company like Disney has? They had 37 out of the 100. As years go by and as we have more Pixar, more DreamWorks, more of these other studios that are coming along, independent, foreign, anime, etc., do we see that, if we did this list in 10, 15 years, do you think Disney would have a smaller percentage of the top 100, or are we on the verge of another, Disney renaissance, so to speak, where they're going to have another resurgence and they would hold just as strong, if not stronger?
That's a tough question. It's hard to say what if they continue on the path they're going. I'd say they probably would continue with the percentage. I think no matter what year you do this, Disney's going to dominate it, and I don't see the percentage changing that much in 10 to 15 years. You may not have certain Disney movies like Meet the Robinsons on there, but you probably replace it with something else that's recent during that time. So I just think do you see any of these companies falling off? Is DreamWorks, for example, is that something that could fall off and have even less films if you do that in the future? I don't see DreamWorks because I think at this point they're a money-making machine with some of their franchises. Well, we'll see. I guess we could see Pixar dropping off if they continue to decline. They have been, and with they've been with stuff like Monsters Inc. and Brave and Cars 2, they haven't lived up to their previous films like WALL-E and those things. So they may not hold such a high regard as they do right now if they continue to put out a lesser product that they have been. So.
Neil, what's your thoughts on the future of the animation landscape and how companies may change, or how this list could change in future years?
It's tough to say, except that I think Disney's always going to be there, just because there is such a high emphasis on quality and on their pictures. Even in spite of movies like Home on the Range, which was kind of a low point for them, but they've always stood for quality, so I think they're always going to be there in some regard. On the topic of Pixar, I think what we're going to see happen is that the difference between Disney and Pixar is slowly going to fade. Mostly because a lot of what made those early movies great is a personal commitment on the part of individual staff members at Pixar to put out great movies like Toy Story and even some of the shorts that I guess aren't really in the scope of this, but what was that, Bounded, that came out with I think The Incredibles. Everything they make is just fantastic, but it is slowly on a decline, and I think it's just because it's just kind of getting absorbed into Disney, and as people retire, move out of Pixar, or there's cross-pollination between the two studios, it's just slowly going to become the same. Let's see. DreamWorks, I think DreamWorks is always going to be around, but I think Pixar is going to become sort of like DreamWorks, where it's just kind of it's there and it's got a lot of franchises and it stands for quality, but Pixar is DreamWorks is not as special as Pixar, and I'm not sure if I'm getting my point across, but Pixar kind of keep mixing these two up. DreamWorks is always going to be there. It's a good studio, maybe doesn't have as much heart as Pixar, and I don't know. It's always going to be there, but I guess I should move on.
Well, I mean, I think we're at an interesting point, though, in animation history, because I think for so many decades, there is no question about it. What's the best animation studio? Who's putting out the best animated movies? It's Disney. It's Disney. It's Disney for decade and decade and decade. I think in recent, in the last 10, 20 years, ever since that Disney Renaissance ended, I guess, a little after Lion King, it was kind of the first time in history where, people could make an argument for another company, specifically Pixar, in recent times. So it'll be interesting to see now if Disney takes back that throne with what they're doing now and reigns again and kind of knocks these other guys down a little bit, or if we have that competition between them all, fueling each other to always, striving for more, or how that'll work. But, this is the first time, I think, in film history where Disney, as far as the animated films go, is not necessarily at if you're looking back at the last 10 years at the top. Maybe if you're looking back at just the last couple, they've had that resurgence. So be interesting to see how it goes. Steve, your thoughts on future landscape?
I think Disney / Pixar, because they're the same entity, are going to be kind of up and down. I think right now is their resurgence, but it's going to eventually fall again. DreamWorks and some of the other ones, it's kind of hit or miss, although it does seem like DreamWorks is starting to actually do halfway decent. Same thing with like the Sony animation and stuff like that. DC, I foresee a lot of good things coming in the near future from them as well. I definitely see it all impacting a list again in the future. Should we do something like this, either with the same films or any kind of animation or whatever we choose to do next? I see a lot of it changing the next time around, just because of what we may have watched from this time, and from the fact that these studios may actually have something to push some of these either current new ones that are on our list right now or old ones out. But yeah, I definitely see them going. It's kind of going to be up and down.
Do you think if we did this list in 10 years that we'd actually have a Marvel movie make our countdown?
Not as of right now. Now, if we were doing live action films, I would not doubt it in the slightest. I would probably see a lot more of those than I would DC. So, but DC's animation is so far trumping Marvel.
All right. Just going around the table, just general thoughts of the countdown, and before we get into feedback, maybe whatever you want to bring up. Biggest surprise of the countdown, biggest disappointment, things we got right, things we got wrong, biases, etc. Dan, just general thoughts on the countdown overall before we get into the listener thoughts.
Well, general thoughts. I thought it was, overall, I didn't have any really major issues with it. I think as a list, as a whole, I was kind of proud of it. I think a lot of hard work went into it for a lot of people, and I think the final product shows that. And yeah, there might be some spacing issues here and there, but I'm glad we did get a wide range of movies. Maybe we could have had, a wider range, maybe some older films, of course. But I think, considering everyone that put their thoughts into it, I think the biases, as much as they could have been, were removed, and the gripes that are there, I think, are really minute compared to what they could have been. So.
Yeah, I agree, and I'm definitely happy with the overall product. If I had to, I'm not disappointed with any of it. If I had to point out one area that I think was probably the weakest part of the list, would be the overabundance of late '90s Disney films. Specifically, I thought that was probably the worst part about our countdown was how many of those we had. I guess the biggest surprise for me would be that Toy Story franchise took number 1 and number 2. I think, like a lot of people, I thought like a Lion King would sneak in there and be in one of those spots, or something like that. I was somewhat surprised when I did all the tallies and added everything up that we ended up with a clean sweep of the top 2 spots by Toy Story. Neil, surprises, disappointments, general reactions to the list.
I don't really have a too big a problem with the list. In fact, I'm pretty satisfied with the list. I mean, outside of a couple misplacements of movies, but but that's the thing. There are only a few. So overall, it was a pretty good list. And going back to how I compiled my list, I didn't worry too much about biases sneaking in. I pretty much knew that I was going to have biases no matter what. But I think just the nature of the list, having 20 different people contributing, or groups of people at least, it kind of, for the most part, it kind of ironed all those biases out and ranked things appropriately, regardless of what the biases were. The exception being, like what you said, the late 90s films from Disney, where, some of those were not so good, and yeah, that was really the only disappointing part for me. I think I'll have to agree with that. Other than that, I was pretty satisfied with it.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a good point too. Is when we include that many lists, what happens is it does have to movies do have to have somewhat of a not necessarily universal appeal, but they have to be regarded by most of the people working on the list as at least deserving of somewhere in the top 100. Because if you look at it, it was very rare for a film. Like just take our top 50. It's almost impossible to be on our top 50 without being on over half, if not 2/3 of the lists that were submitted. So it does, regardless of if one list is biased towards Pixar, one list is biased towards 90s Disney, one list is biased towards superhero films, etc. That kind of goes out the window, because in order for a film to be highly ranked, it had to be on 2/3 of the list, regardless of an individual bias amongst that may be out there. May turn up a little bit more in the latter half, that first 20-30 films where you didn't have to quite be in half of the list to be on there. But yeah, that's definitely the bonus of having as many people as we did. It does, like you said, iron out some of that. Steve, overall reactions, general thoughts on it before we get into the listeners' thoughts?
I definitely think that we did a fairly good job this time around compared to the top 100 animated cartoons, quote unquote all-time list, because one, we had a lot more contributors, mostly in part to Dan, and then I think also it helps because there's more attention paid to films for the fact that they're films rather than the nostalgia of watching a television show. So I think that helps a lot in this area compared to that top 100. And I also feel like not only has the feedback been great on this, but the way things have happened to fall, even if I may disagree with them, I can't really argue with anything that actually showed up. It's right. A lot of it was well warranted, well placed. The fact that we had such great diversity in this entire countdown has been amazing. Anime did get represented. Foreign did get represented. I will agree that there have been some biases, and I'm sure there have been people inflating it on purpose, but that's unavoidable in pretty much anything. But I definitely think that it gave us an opportunity to learn from it and to, again, further tweak it in the future. But it's been an amazing ride.
Yeah, for sure. And I think too, yeah, regardless of, some people may have issues with certain things not being ranked as high or certain things ranked, as low. There's definitely going to be a lot that we get into here with the feedback. But overall, yeah, it was definitely can't make too many arguments against one thing or be up in arms too much about it. So getting into the feedback a little bit, first of all, thank you, everybody that was providing feedback. We have a ton of feedback. Steve, do you know how many comments, emails, etc. that we got in total, by any chance?
The comments on the site, even if it was partially us, kind of ranged between 60 and 80 as far as just comments on each individual post. We did happen to get 10 individual emails, 2 of which included a voicemail clip, which will be played after we get through the email part. But yeah, definitely good hearing from everybody, hearing the opinions and some of the how they would have placed things, or either calling us out or trying to better understand how we place things.
Well, and I think one thing that people need to realize too is, we could have we could get everybody together, or as many people as we want to together, and we could really have like a brainstorming session, and we could just for hours and hours argue and debate amongst ourselves and then come up with our list, kind of as more of a collaborative effort. But I think part of the fun for us or for you guys is not knowing the list ahead of time and kind of the reveal process and going through one by one just to see without that discussion, without being able to debate back and forth, which may produce a better list overall. It creates more of that, I don't know, not necessarily suspense, but more of that interesting reveal as we go through and see, without that knowledge, how did things stack up, just us blindly submitting our own list. Not saying it's the perfect method, but it's a method that works well for the way we're doing things with the podcasting and whatnot. So I kind of like doing it this way, even if, if we had like an actual brainstorming session, we might be able to come up with a list we're more 100% proud of. But that's just kind of part of the beast. Did you want to go into any of some of the issues that were brought up in the emails?
I noticed that some of them were just people basing it off of placement, or some of it was calling out like the fact that Transformers and where it placed, or DC Batman or Wreck-It Ralph. And again, I think we kind of discussed some of the biases in the introduction episode of this, and I think we've kind of covered it in this episode that, some of it's unavoidable, but and some of it we agree, they place too high or whatnot. But I did see a lot of that in there. There were a few people that sent in what they would have listed things at, which was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I think too is something that kind of came up with a lot of the feedback was, there's a lot of people that wanted to include this or include that, and through the comments on the site specifically is like, well, okay, but then what do you take out? And that's one thing that I think is a little bit harder to do. Got some good discussion there, because if everything that you want to bring up or include or put higher, then that means you have to also in turn take something out, bump something back, etc. So leads to some good discussion there. Obviously, a lot of people wanted us to rank anime higher in general, which we expected.
There was some mention of not nearly enough love for claymation or stop motion animation, which again I stated my opinion of it earlier. Should we do this again in the future, I will make sure I've seen everything that was at least on this list to better rank them for the next time, right. Including more claymation and stop motion, even though I personally despise the animation style. I will get beyond that to try and watch it to better vote it next time. I did notice some people listing some movies and then actually giving opinions of what to remove, such as adding like a Winnie the Pooh film and Brave Little Toaster, and removing like Shrek 2, Ice Age, Cars, or TMNT and that kind of stuff, which was kind of interesting. We did get some positive feedback of the fact that they were impressed by the fact that we've taken such a big undertaking of not doing a top 10 or top 20, but doing an entire top 100 all in one list kind of thing, and also kind of comparing it with Rotten Tomatoes and other sites like that. So
I thought it was interesting too. One person I think they were a contributor as well, even took like all the different lists that they could find. They said they took Rotten Tomatoes and IMDb and all these different lists and kind of mashed them together and saw that our list wasn't too far off from when you take all of those and kind of combine them. He had an interesting way of putting them all together and seeing what was ranked on all those different lists and what ranked high, and we were pretty in line with it. Another discussion that a lot of people had through the email and whatnot was how much you should make sure that, saying that there's basically some must watches, some films that you have to watch before you make this list, which obviously some people that are involved you can't see every film, etc. So I understand that to a point. Dan, can you kind of weigh in on that argument? Are there some films that basically everyone should have watched before they went about making this list?
I would say yes, but I'd also say like that those must watches are probably different for every single person, so it's hard to say. And I think to consider is the accessibility of some of those movies. Like, I know a lot of people pointed to some of the anime films. Well, it's hard to get access to them in, limited space, limited time. You don't have movie stores anymore. It can get expensive, like renting online. So, but I do understand, and I don't necessarily disagree with the idea that when you're like constructing this list, of trying to have as much background knowledge as you can. But I think no matter, you always can get to a point where there's something you haven't seen yet or haven't seen in a while. And there is limited time here. This isn't something we do for a living. This is something we do for a free time. So I would love to be able to go back and rewatch all the classic Disney movies, go back and rewatch, some of the movies I haven't watched in a while, but it's just a limited amount of time. I mean, I did try to, fill some holes as I made my list, and some of those ended up making my top 100. But I also think you have to understand that a lot of people who gave out lists and contributed did so, out of their own kindness of their hearts, and I wasn't going to demand them to, make sure that they have certain films, because it's time consuming just to construct a list and then just to try to watch movies on the top of that. And I think it also gives you a good picture of just what people think in general in some ways. And I think that's why we try to get a different variety of people to contribute it. Some general fans, some more hardcore fans, some in the middle. And I think because of that mix, we got a list full of, films from all different types, all different eras, and all different types of formats. So
I think too, you bring up a good point, and you brought up a good point overall. Going on, what your kind of hope was for something like this. And I think a couple different things I kind of hope in creating this series of podcasts. Number one, for just anyone who's a fan of animation, anyone who's a fan of animated films, etc., this is hopefully something that they can enjoy, something they can listen to people talk about a lot of films that they love. But more to your point, hopefully can expose people to some stuff that maybe they haven't seen, maybe they put on their list to watch. And as the first time that we've ever done something like this with the animated films, I think it's a good starting point. It throws out it kind of is, to me, like taking all the animated films that are maybe noteworthy, and it just kind of throws them out there, so that if you were to do this again, you kind of have an idea of all the different films that were mentioned, all the ones that possibly could be worthy of making the list. It gives you a good cross-section of all the films maybe that you should take into consideration when trying to come up with your own list, or trying to come up with your own favorite movies, or movies to add to your collection, movies to watch, etc. And then hopefully spark some debate. I do enjoy that, at least according to a couple of the people that submitted emails, even talking about them and their friends having debates on this that we inspired or caused them to have a bunch of debates on what they would put in their list. So, encouraging debate, encouraging discussion, and hopefully giving a wide cross-section of all the different movies that could possibly be in someone's top 100, I think was the main goal for me. So I enjoy that. Steve, other thoughts on the feedback, or other things you wanted to touch on?
I noticed there were a couple people that were stating the fact of, again, more films that got left off that, again, we touched on. And then the fact that some films, such as Aladdin, there's like there's like half of it kind of split one way and half the other way, and on a lot of the films, and I found that kind of interesting that people were catching that. I really wasn't paying attention to it when we were talking about it, but there's that, and then the fact that there are people mentioning things about if we were to do it again in 10 years or so, what current films, and again, I'm not going to touch on that because that could either be blog posts in the future or, again, another episode or another saga of this kind. But also people are asking, hopeful that there'll be another top 100.
Yeah, I was, number one, very surprised at how much positive feedback we got on this one, and on kind of going in hand to that, surprised at how many people are clamoring for more of this in the future, and that makes me smile, because that is exactly the type of stuff I like to do.
Yes, the amount that we may do it depends, and it again depends on time, because these are usually many months in the making because of the high caliber we're going for.
The good thing is, though, that since this is our second one, we've learned a lot through doing the Top 100 Animated Series and now the Top 100 Animated Films, and we're getting polished and efficient. At least I am. So I don't think it's going to quite take as much time as it has in the past, so we may be able to do them a little more often and quicker and faster and more efficiently with still getting a good product now that we've kind of learned some stuff from our first two ventures.
Yes. But yeah, in 2014 there'll be an announcement. I will tease the fact that there will be another Top 100. I will not state what it is.
But we also have a way for you to chime in.
Yes, we do. Which is, you can call the voicemail line, which is 502-526-5821. You can email us, feedback@geekcastradio.com. You can visit the episode posts on geekcastradio.com and leave your comments there as they are released. You can keep up with all information on Geekcast Radio either on Facebook by searching Geekcast Radio Network or on Twitter at Geekcast Radio. My Twitter handle is at SCP21 if you want to get a hold of me, and your guys' is?
Mine's at OptimusSolo.
Mine is Neil Sama.
And Dan is at Movie Revolt. And Steve, did you want to talk about the poll real quick as well?
Yes, the poll on the website currently is, which is now changed. It says, now that the Top 100 is over, how often do you want to see one of these? And the options are every other year, 2 a year, or yearly.
So how often do you want to see the Top 100 list or Top 50 list or things like this? Do you want us to do just one a year? Do you want us to take years off and just do one every other year? Or do you want these as many times as possible, multiple times per year? So that is, go ahead, let your voice be heard. We will try to accommodate, what the masses want as much as we can. Like I said, it is a task, so we can do only so much, but we will try to do as much as everybody can.
Yep. So I think that about covers it. I'm not sure what we'll be talking about next in Geekcast Radio. I know we'll be going into a plethora of roundtable episodes coming up in the near future. The general thought process is, and it probably won't be until after the beginning of the year, we're going to try and shoot for weekly with varying hosts on the show. So stay tuned for that. And again, there'll be more information later on the next Top 100, which will be in 2014.
And if you are a fan of this, you probably maybe new to the network, I would say stay tuned, because before we get to our next Top 100, we will have another cool event going on at GeekCast Radio that you'll probably want to be a part of, which will be our next GCRN Wars tournament, which will be coming in the first half of 2014 as well.
Yes, that is a momentous occasion, considering the first one was such a resounding success, and
this one's going to be even better.
This one's going to be twice as big.
So be ready for the next GCRN Wars tournament, and then hopefully after that we'll get into our next possibility for Top 100, Top 50 list.
So until next time, we have been
OptimusSolo,
Beer Vault Dan,
and TV's Mr. Neil. Thank you for putting up with my stammering.
No problem, and until next time, unleash the geek in you.
Hello, Mike and the GCRN crew. Brad here from Australia with some thoughts on the top 100, or more importantly, the top 10 animated films of all time. The only one I probably wouldn't have put in the top 10 is Iron Giant, but that's only because I haven't seen it. As for Lion King versus Toy Story, well, as the list shows, the Lion King's undisputedly the number one animated or hand-drawn traditional film of all time, and Toy Story number one CG. And I guess depending on the day, you could go either way, whether Toy Story was number one or Lion King was number one. Probably a bit better of a discussion would be which was better between Toy Story 1 and the third Toy Story movie. And I suppose a bit of controversy to add to the pot. After stating that some of the films should have been added because of what they did, or their technical merit. I was surprised the Final Fantasy Spirits Within wasn't somewhere in the top 100. Yes, the plot wasn't the best, but just for what it done for CGI animation back in the day, I remember a lot of people talking, saying this was the way movies were going, and that actors would be reduced to voice cast. But anyway, overall, it's a good selection of movies. I can't disagree with too many of them. They're all great films. And I look forward to the next countdown. So, thanks guys, and I'll catch you all later.
Hey guys, Jeremy here. I'm just figured I send you an MP3 of my 2 cents in regards to the top 100 animated films. Currently, I'm listening to number 10, so I don't know what number 1 is as of yet, but the only quick thing that I want to say in regards to Dark Knight Returns, and I would have put it in number 1 only because it is one of the more interesting of the Batman stories. Like, if the Justice League did break up, I think it would go something like this. If Batman was forced to retire, if the Joker did come out of retirement and they did have one final battle, I feel that this is, it would definitely go down the way that it did in the movie. I don't want to give away too many spoilers on Dark Knight Returns Part 2, because I don't know if Mike finally got to sit down and watch Part 2, but when he does, it's a very, when you do watch Part 2, Mike, there is something I wanted to discuss with you in regards to the quote-unquote final Joker-Batman fight. But in Dark Knight Returns, Joker kind of comes off like an aging rock star coming out of retirement. The same thing with Bruce Wayne, aka Batman. I also like that Superman has become a tool of the government, and he's trying to prevent the Cold War, or doing his best to destroy as many nuclear missiles as possible. And I also love how the authority figures, like the mayor and the deputy mayor in these movies, look like Weeble toys, like Weeble Wobble, they don't fall down. It's definitely a love letter to the 80s. I mean, the mutants remind me of the 1980 punk phase. When Joker's on the talk show, it's showing how big David Letterman was becoming. So it's well thought out, it's well written, and it does have an interesting ending. So it does have the nice little what if scenario. And as for another Batman movie, I love Under the Red Hood because it is another tight story. It's well voice acted, and I also Bender as the Joker. Enough said. In regards to 2 other movies on the list, Wreck-It Ralph and Little Mermaid, I would have put them somewhere between 4 and 5. Wreck-It Ralph I would put 4, Little Mermaid I put 5. I think Wreck-It Ralph is an interesting... I like how Ralph and Vanellope von Schweetz play off of each other. It's a tighter story about wanting to change one's character / fate per se. It's definitely when they're in the the candy the Sugar Rush world. Yeah, it's definitely beautifully animated, and when they're in the that bug world where it's like a first person shooter, it's definitely a homage to all the 90s shooter games. And Alan Tudyk as King Candy is like an Edwin Mad Hatter type of personality, was just icing on the Sugar Rush cake. Little Mermaid, I think a lot of girls, of course, thought of Ariel as a role model, but I definitely had a crush on Ariel. I know she's an animated character, and I think next to Maleficent, Ursula is one of the more interesting Disney villains. she's got a great song. I love Poor Unfortunate Souls. I like how it's animated. I like how she's telling Ariel about making deals, and if people can't pay a price, they're turned to like these little polyp things. I love the little, those eel henchmen that Ursula has. It's just another underrated, underappreciated villain. So, all in all, great list, loved it, and talk to you guys soon. Bye-bye.
You've just listened to GeekCast Radio on the GeekCast Radio Network. There are several ways to get in contact with us or leave feedback for the show. First, visit the website, geekcastradio.com, where you can comment on all of our different podcasts. Second, you can rate our show and leave us feedback in iTunes. Third, follow us on Twitter at GeekCast Radio. Fourth, become a fan on Facebook. Go to facebook.com/GeekCastRadio. Call the voicemail line 502-526-5821. Please remember to tell us the show you are leaving the message for and your name. So until next time, unleash the geek in you.